So hello everyone. Again, my name is Jason Solke, and I'm the programs director for the Incose Chesapeake chapter. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's virtual lecture. A couple of preliminaries. As usual, at the end we will be raffling a door prize, and I'll be using the registration emails to contact the lucky winner. The prize for tonight is a book called The Innovating for People Handbook to Human-Centered Design Method by Luma Institute. Second, there will be time for our time after the talk for the questions, but if you can, please put the questions into chat during the presentation. I'll leave it to our speaker to decide if they want to answer them during the presentation or any of the open questions at the end of the presentation. I will help to facilitate those questions. For this evening, we are honored to host Ms. Lymari Castro-Diaz. Ms. Castro-Diaz is a system engineer in the Department of Defense. In her 19 years working in the DoD, she provided expertise to a variety of complex missions and strategic initiatives. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Physics and 2 master's degrees in the fields of engineering physics and systems engineering. She is certified in Scaled Agile Framework, Scrum at Scale, Large Scale Scrum, and is an enterprise business agility strategist. She is a member of Incose, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, Society of Women's Engineers, Agile Alliance, and the National Defense Industrial Association. So with that introduction, I will now turn the virtual podium over to our speaker, Lymari. Please take it from here.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everyone, for coming to this session and for having me here tonight. My name is Lymari Castro, and tonight I'm going to share with you a design thinking roadmap for process improvement. So I guess Jason already covered my background. So I have 22 years of combined systems engineering experience. I worked 3 years in private industry doing systems engineering for Raytheon, building radars for the military, and I have 19 years in Department of Defense. So the presentation tonight is focused on the design thinking techniques, which are techniques and tools for quick problem solving, using a lot of creativity and collaboration, focus on having a human-centered design approach. So my goal tonight is to give you a set of techniques that you can use to navigate an unknown environment. And I'm going to provide some background about why I use the techniques that I use and what I was trying to solve. But basically, I want to give you a set of tools and a set of techniques that you can use when you are facing a problem that maybe you are new in the organization or you don't have the enough information about the process that you need to improve, or your organization is going through a change management activity and you are limited in the time that you have to provide results. I'm going to give you a design thinking process or a design thinking roadmap to quickly identify the challenges that need to be improved, prioritize those challenges, and create ideas for solutions. And the approach that I'm going to show tonight is going to combine the techniques from design thinking with the best practices from Agile and Lean Startup. And it's an incremental approach that you can use to drive change in your organization and create a common vision for the future. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the experience so you have context of what was the effort that I was working on. So in 2019, I was in a professional development program in the Department of Defense, and I had the wonderful opportunity to work at NASA for 1 year as a diversity tour. And I was going to work at the engineering organization in Goddard Space Flight Center. And going in there, I did not have any idea of the engineering organization, of what they did, the challenges that they had. I didn't know anyone in the organization except my sponsor. And when I got there, he asked me to lead a change effort that was going to impact the entire engineering directorate impacting over 1,200 employees, including systems engineers, all disciplines in engineering, managers and senior executives in the engineering directorate, a variety of work roles. And everything that I'm going to discuss tonight is in the context of a large cross-organizational, cross-directorate proposal process that Goddard uses as one of the many processes that they have to request funding for proposals to develop new technology and to develop new projects. So when I got there, the organization had been working in providing engineering support for concept development and cost estimation to this large cross-organizational process for many years. But there was a lot of pain points working with this process because they, first of all, they did not own the proposal process. This was a corporate process for the center for Goddard, where 5 different directorates provide support in the process. And this was a very complex, long process with a lot of dependencies and exchanges of information across teams and across directorates. And the end-to-end process, from the moment the principal investigator has an idea of a science concept until the proposal is submitted to headquarters for funding, can take about 24 months. So it's 2 years of hard work getting these proposals together. The organization, given the technology that they're working with and the subject matter expertise that is required for this work, they have limited resources to do the work. So managers were always trying to manage the resources and reassign them as needed to work the proposals. So people were, so some people were working multiple priorities at the same time, which meant that some people were working the proposals and at the same time they were working their engineering projects, or some engineers were also providing support to more than one proposal at the same time. And each proposal could be in a different stage of the proposal life cycle. So this was a lot of complexity. There was a lot of complexity involved in this process. Another challenge that the management team had was trying to find ways to incentivize people to work the proposals. Some people didn't want to work this type of work, like providing support to proposals, because of the stress that it represented for some of them. So at the end of the day, what they wanted, if they want me to help them find ways to be more efficient in providing support to this proposal process. They knew that they could not change the corporate process because they were not the final owners of the process, but they wanted to find ways in which they internally in the engineering directorate could be more efficient and effective in providing support to these proposals. So as I said before, when I got there, I didn't know anything about the organization. I didn't know anything about the proposal process, or I didn't know the people. So I wanted to become fully immersed in this culture because I wanted to have a good understanding of the challenges that they were having so I could deliver meaningful results and bring value to the organization. But I only had 1 year to do it. So what I did is that I went to my Agile approach, and using the best practices from Agile, I broke my entire year at NASA in 5 time box phases: assessment, evaluation, analysis, recommendations, and implementation. And some of the phases overlap. And what I was doing is I was trying to show incremental delivery frequently to the management team and the senior executive team to gather the feedback and incorporate that new knowledge in the planning of the activities that I was doing in each of the phases as a way of making sure that I was delivering value and meeting the needs of the organization. And this also helped me to keep all the different stakeholders in the organization actively engaged in the process improvement activity. So the implementation of the assessment, evaluation, and analysis phase was done using the design thinking process. And again, design thinking is a set of techniques that you can use for quick problem solving and design of solutions, focusing on the needs of the user or the stakeholder. And very early in the design thinking process, during the observation phase, I use the Lean Startup techniques to understand the environment of the stakeholder and be able to put everything in context so the things will make sense. And I'm going to discuss all of these steps in the process in detail during the presentation. So these are the 5 time box phases, and this slide, doesn't show the overlap of the phases, but the intent of the slide is to explain what happened in each of the steps, the purpose of each of the steps. So during the assessment phase, that was my opportunity to get to know the organization, learn about the proposal process, understand the pain points and the opportunities for improvement from the different stakeholders in the proposal process from the engineering organization. In the evaluation phase, I created a baseline of the proposal process from the perspective of the engineering organization, and I guided the organization through a design thinking process to explore all the problems that they were having, prioritize them, and create ideas for solutions that will work for the entire organization. During the evaluation phase, as a result of that phase, the organization identified the quick wins and high-value solutions that they wanted to implement. Analysis, overlap, assessment, and evaluation, and it was focused on narrowing down the scope of the process improvement activity to focus on the common challenges that kept repeating and coming up during the assessment and evaluation phase. And recommendations was focused on prioritizing the quick wins and the high-value solutions that were identified during the evaluation phase. And implementation was taking those quick wins and high-value solutions and breaking them into specific activities to create a roadmap of tasks and activities that will be implemented. So in this slide, what I'm trying to show is the overlap of the 3, I would say the different processes. So you can see the overlap between the assessment, evaluation, and analysis. And this was an iterative process where I was gathering frequent feedback to adapt the approach based on that feedback. And then during the assessment, evaluation, and analysis, the process that I implemented was a design thinking process, doing observations, understanding the problems that needed to be solved, and exploring solutions for improvement. And then very early in the design thinking process, I used the Lean Startup approach with the value proposition canvas and the mission model canvas. So for those of you who are not familiar with design thinking provides, is a framework that provides a set of tools and techniques that will help you focus on the things that are important to the end user, to improve the experience of the user. It provides a human-centered approach for problem solving, and the techniques and the tools that the framework provides can be applied to any situation. You can apply them to prioritize and focus on the problems that your technical team is trying to improve or to change, for an organizational change management activity, or for process improvement. Okay. So this is a framework that I use for, this is from the Luma Institute of Design Thinking. And basically they have techniques for the different phases of the design thinking process. They have some techniques for observation, understanding and prioritization of problems, and for creating ideas for solutions and prioritizing those ideas. The techniques that are in the rectangles, in the boxes, those are the ones that I used during my experience at NASA, during my 1 year at NASA, and those are the ones that I'm going to discuss in more detail in this presentation. But before we continue, I want to talk about the value of using the design thinking process. So design thinking is looking at the needs and desires of the end user or the stakeholder, the things that they would like to see. So where they are looking at the emotional innovation, the organizational behaviors, the culture, the things that need to be changed for to meet the needs of the end user, the stakeholder. Then after you understand those needs and desires, then you can talk about the requirements for success with some ideas for process innovation. What things are viable, can be done in the organization, given the business or the process that they have at hand. And then talk about the technical possibilities. What is technically feasible to help change promote those changes with some functional innovation. So design thinking is at the center of the emotional innovation with the process innovation and functional innovation. So I think there are 2 questions in the chat. So I'm going to talk about assessment, evaluation, and analysis phases right now. So those are the phases where I use the design thinking process. So these are the techniques that I use during the assessment, evaluation, and analysis phases. So this is the entire design thinking process, starting from observation to understanding the challenges, prioritizing them, and then exploring solutions for improvement. So the first set of techniques that I used were interviews. And what I did is that I set up 2 hours interview. Each of the interviews was 2 hours long, and I set up interviews with each of the members of the management team because that was the first team that was available to me. So I conducted 27 interviews in a 3-month time frame, and I used the approach of the Lean Startup method, which is using structured interviews focused on 5 set of questions. First, understanding the role of the stakeholder in the process, then identifying the pain points or discovering the challenge areas, validating those challenges, identifying opportunities or gains, and validating those opportunities for improvement. So this was a great approach to get to know the people, get a good understanding of the proposal process, and identify those high-level challenge areas and high-level potential opportunities for improvement. So I would say that at the beginning, this was a very challenging phase because coming from Department of Defense into NASA, some of the words and the terms that people were using during the interviews were unique to the proposal process or unique to NASA. So at the beginning, I needed my sponsor to attend the interviews with me and help facilitate the conversation so I will understand some of the terms. But then after the first 10 interviews, I was able to do the interviews by myself because I felt more comfortable with the process. So after I finished with the interviews, what I did is that I used the value proposition canvas from the Lean Startup as a way of providing a visualization of the pain points and the gains or opportunities for improvement for each of the different work roles that the management team had in the proposal process. And the purpose of doing this, using the value proposition canvas, was to consolidate the information for each of the work roles and also to make it easy for the management team and the senior leadership team to see those pain points and those opportunities for improvement. So it was more like a way of putting everything into context and providing that visualization and a summary of the findings to the management team and the leadership team to make it easier for them. And then I created a mission model canvas for each of the work roles from using the information from the interviews. And this was a good approach to provide a visualization of what needed to be changed, either in the organization or in the proposal process to improve specific problem areas. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Lean Startup approach, the value proposition canvas is used to populate the mission model canvas. So the right side of the value proposition canvas populates the customer segment of the mission model canvas, and the left side is used in the value proposition area of the mission model canvas. So with the interviews, I had a good understanding of the customer segment. I had an idea of some of the opportunities for improvement, the things that will create gains and improve some of the pain points that the organization had, but I did not have enough information to create a solid mission model canvas. I needed to have like a second round of interviews to be able to say these are the solutions that I will recommend moving forward. So the benefits of doing the interviews, as I said before, it was a very good way for me to get familiar with the organization, get to know the people, get a good understanding of the proposal process. But some of the things that came out of the interviews is that I started to build trust with the organization. At the beginning, people didn't know why I was there, why I was trying to improve this process. But after having those face-to-face interviews, they started to get very excited about the process improvement activity, and they saw me as the person who were going to help them improve their experience with the proposal process. So they embraced the idea of having someone looking at this process and helping them. As I said before, the interviews was a good way to identify the high-level challenge areas, but I needed to have more information to be able to make progress. So that was just the tip of the iceberg. There was so much more that needed to be discovered. I needed to learn more about the complexity of the process, the complexity of the organization, so I could get a deep understanding of the challenges and be able to identify solutions that will work for the entire organization. So the next technique that I use is the experience diagram. This is like a sequence diagram. Basically, you have the steps of the proposal process, and then swim lanes showing the different work roles, the different people who interface in each of the phases or steps in the process, the inputs, the outputs, the deliverables, and the time in the x-axis. So this, I would say that experience diagram was a very good way to summarize the proposal process from the perspective of the engineering organization. And it was a very powerful tool to show the internal workflow that was happening in the engineering organization. It showed all the participants from the engineering organization, the decision points, the dependencies, the critical path within the engineering organization, and the many iterations that needed to happen, asking for information or just waiting for another directorate to provide something so they could do their work. So this was a very good way of showing the what I call the undocumented process that was very different from the very nice, pretty chart that the center had showing the process. I mean, this one showed all those dependencies and all the steps that happen internally in the engineering organization. And the good thing about doing this exercise, this activity, is that it showed that the engineering organization was being involved like halfway into the proposal process towards the end. So they were not being engaged early in the proposal process, and that's why some of the pain points they were having, that was the cause of the pain points that they were having, because they were not being engaged early when the proposal process started. They were being engaged probably after 12 months into the proposal process. So at that point, I was like, I would say 5 months into my year at NASA. And I felt like I needed something to move faster into the solution space if I wanted to deliver value to the organization. So I decided to do design thinking workshops with the organization. But the challenge that I had is that when I proposed to the executive leadership team the idea of doing workshops instead of interviews, I received a little bit of resistance from the team because they felt like interviews was the way to go. It was less disruptive to the engineering team if I did the interviews instead of having people participate in a 6 or 7 hour workshop. But so it took a lot of convincing. I had to explain the benefit of using design thinking and why I wanted to change the approach from interviews to design thinking workshops until I got the support from the senior leadership team. So, and as I said before, now I needed to identify solutions that work for everybody in the organization. So I decided to use the design thinking workshops, but the techniques were new in the organization. So I decided to use an incremental design thinking approach. What I did is that I set up one small workshop with the engineering team to gather the perspective of the engineering team. And this workshop was with only 20 participants. And this team went through the entire process of problem discovery and solution exploration. Then I took the results from the first workshop with the engineering team and I gave them to the management team so they could see the ideas for improvement and the pain points of the engineering team that came out of the engineering team's workshop. And then I set up a similar workshop with the management team. It was a small workshop with 10 participants. And again, this team went through the entire process of problem discovery and solution exploration. So the benefit of showing them the results from the first workshop was that when they started creating solutions for improvement, instead of thinking about how they could benefit from improving the process, they were creating solutions thinking about how they could improve the experience of the engineering team with the proposal process. They were thinking about what things they could do as managers of the proposal process to improve the quality of life of the engineering team. So after I completed those 2 workshops, I consolidated all the information. I gave it to the executive leadership team, and I designed a large workshop for the entire organization, having representation from the engineering team, the management team, and the executive leadership team. This was a large activity with 50 participants of the organization. It was an 8-hour-long workshop. And the difference of this workshop compared to the other 2 is that this workshop was focused only on creating solutions and prioritizing solutions that were going to be implemented. And the idea of inviting the engineering and management team, in addition to the executive leadership team, was to blend the perspective of the 3 different groups in the organization. So we could create solutions that work for the entire organization and not for only one team. And that way we were able to create a common vision of the future of the organization with respect to the proposal process from their perspective. So now I'm going to talk about the techniques from design thinking that I use for problem discovery and prioritization. So the first technique that I used was the stakeholder mapping technique. And this is a 15-minute activity that I use as an icebreaker activity. And the goal here was to start a conversation about the proposal process, get people start thinking about the proposal process so we could set up the stage for the rest of the activities that we have planned for the workshop. So this was a very fun activity because we asked the people in the workshop to identify who was at the center of the proposal process, the inputs, the outputs, the relationship with the other organizations, and what people say or think as part of this process. So this was a great icebreaker activity so people will feel relaxed and more comfortable with the workshop. After we did the stakeholder mapping technique, then we move into the rose-bud thorn activity, which is a 1-hour activity. And the goal here is for the teams to identify in 1 hour, the positive, which are the roses, the negative, which are the thorns, and the potential opportunities, or the bugs, using color-coded sticky notes. So everything that was pink or red was something positive, blue negative, and green or yellow, it was a potential opportunity. The idea of this activity was to have the teams in 1 hour as quickly as possible without overthinking, identify all those positive, negative, and potential opportunities so we could get a deep understanding of the challenges and the potential areas for improvement. And again, this promoted collaboration between the teams because everybody provided input. After they identify the positive, negative, and potentials, we move into the affinity clustering technique, which is a 1 hour activity where we ask the teams to group all the potential positive and negative things by common things, by similarity. And you can see here, this is an example of one of the affinity clustering charts that they created. And you can see how they related some of the areas or challenge areas with another one. For example, we have process. They related it with technical expectations. Why are we here? What makes us unique? How to create excitement, improve relationships, improve how the team works, push innovations, and share knowledge. So this created common understanding of the common challenge areas and the relationship. After they had those common themes, then we asked them to frame the problem statements using the how might we statement technique, which is a 30-minute activity. And the goal here was to look at those clusters, high-level clusters, and frame them, asking the question, how might we improve this particular challenge, or how might we fix this particular situation? And you can see here how they took each of the clusters and made them a question, rephrased it as a question. For example, in expectations, they had, how might we better communicate priorities, roles, expectations to proposal team members? Or how might we share information between proposals in the knowledge sharing area? So again, this is promoting collaboration, diversity of thinking, for focusing on the problems that need to be solved. So now at this point, we were done with the problem discovery phase. Now we know the real questions that we needed to get answered as part of this process improvement activity. And we move into the ideation of solutions phase of the design thinking process. So the first technique that we use for creation of ideas is called the creative matrix. And this is a 30-minute activity where the teams had a template for the creative matrix, and each of the columns is a different phase or step in the process, and the rows are what we call enabler categories. So these are things that can help in the proposal process in the different phases. So we had things like technology, governance, people. I think we also had like leadership, process. And the idea is that in only 30 minutes, everybody puts as many ideas as possible in the sticky notes, looking at the intersection of the enabler category with each of the steps in the proposal process. And again, this is like a very quick thinking activity where people just put as many ideas as possible, and some ideas were like out of the box ideas. So every idea goes on the wall. It doesn't matter if it's something that cannot be implemented at the moment because they don't have the resources or the technology, but still it goes on the wall. And the idea is to promote discussion and diversity of thinking about the team members and gather all the perspectives from people in the room. And this is an example of one of the creative matrices that they created during the workshop. You can see here that they have the different steps of the process with the different enabler categories and all the stickies. So after they completed the creative matrix, we gave them 5 minutes to identify from all the ideas that they had on the creative matrix, to select the top 10 ideas that they would like to see implemented. And again, this is a very quick activity. Do not overthink. And the question, this was not a priority activity. It was more to asking the question, like, if I had all the resources, all the money and the technology available today, which 10 ideas you would like to see implemented? So in 5 minutes, everybody went to the wall and identified those top 10 ideas from the creative matrix. So they were down selecting ideas. After they had the top 10 ideas, we move into the importance difficulty matrix, which is a 30-minute exercise to identify the most impactful ideas. So in this matrix, in the x-axis, you can do it by importance or impact, and the y-axis is difficulty or cost. In our case, we use importance and difficulty of implementation. In the lower quadrant are the lower left quadrant are the quick wins. The right lower quadrant are the high value solutions. The top left are the luxuries or things that are not worth investing the money and the time. And then you have your strategic long-term solutions. The goal of using the importance difficulty matrix is for them to identify, like, do the relative ranking of those potential solutions by the perceived value, like the relative importance and the relative difficulty of implementation. So as you can see here in this example, they put the different stickies, the different ideas in the matrix, and identify the quick wins, the high value solutions, luxuries, and strategic solutions. But they also identify the relationship between some of the solutions. For example, here they had one quick win, then something like was midterm, and then a high value solution. So doing this exercise with the importance difficulty matrix gives you enough information to create an action plan or a roadmap for implementation, because you have the things that they want to see. So at the beginning, you want to focus on the quick wins and the high value solutions. Long term, you want to work towards your strategic solutions. And maybe you would like to, I mean, you have the money and the time, maybe you will want to do some of the luxuries. So from the importance difficulty matrix, after they had the matrix completed, we asked the teams, each team, to select one idea from the high value quadrant of the matrix and use that idea to create a storyboard. This was a 1-hour activity where basically they sketch how that high value solution will look like in the future. What's the new workflow from the perspective of the engineering organization? Again, they were not changing the corporate process because they did not own the process, but they were looking for ways in which they could change the way they were interfacing with the process or managing the work internally so they could be more effective. So they have here, like, this is an example of one of the storyboards. They created an internal workflow within the engineering organization, and they created new things, like maybe we can do engineering house calls and have one engineer provide support for an hour, and then do office hours for concept evaluation and have 5 engineers for 2 hours, and identify things that were free, fund them. So this is creating a new vision, a new way of doing work in the organization. The last technique that they use during the solution creation phase of the design thinking process, it's called the concept poster, which is a 1-hour activity. And we were using this concept poster template from the Luma Institute of Design Thinking. And the goal here is to capture all the elements or the main points of that idea so it could be fully implemented. So this is capturing what needed to be in place for the full realization of the idea. And in the poster, some of the fields that needed to be completed is like, what name would you give to that idea? What organizations needed to be involved? over here, this is what goes here is a storyboard. So basically, this is mapped to the storyboard. And the most important thing in the concept poster is this area here, which is the timeline. And you can see here how they identify the different steps or the different things that needed to be in place for the full implementation of the idea. So this combined with the storyboard and with the impact benefit metrics created a common vision for the future of the organization in terms of the proposal process. I mean, they created a new vision of how they will interact with the proposal process moving forward. So this was the last activity during the assessment, evaluation, analysis phase. Now that we have all that information, I move into the recommendations phase. And this was a very straightforward phase where I took all the ideas from the impact benefit matrix with the quick wins, the high value solutions, the luxuries, long-term solutions, and the information that I had in the storyboards and the concept posters, and I gave them to the management team for prioritization. So the management team decided to select only 3 recommendations moving forward for implementation. And again, this was due to the fact that they had limited resources to do the work. This was other duties as assigned, so they needed to find ways to work this while still doing the regular jobs. Then they identify leads for the implementation of each of the recommendations. But this was a very straightforward step because the people who participated in the workshops, they expressed that they wanted to continue with the effort and that they wanted to lead the implementation of the recommendations. So they self-identify as leads for each of those recommendations. And what they did is that they started to put together teams. They started to recruit others in the organization. But this was also a very easy step because the people who participated in the workshops, they raised their hand and they say that they wanted to continue with the effort and volunteer to be part of the teams for implementation. The last phase of my year at NASA was the implementation phase. By then, I was wrapping up everything because it was time for me to go back to Department of Defense. So I took the implementation phase and I broke it into 2 sub-phases, planning and execution. In the planning sub-phase, I met with each of the team leads and I created like a long-term strategic plan using the information from the impact benefit matrix. And then I met with them and created short-term action plans for the next year, focusing on the high value and the quick win solutions. And that helped me create a roadmap of activities and tasks for the teams to implement to improve this process. Then in the execution phase, what I did is that I took the strategic plans, the action plans, and I moved them into a backlog of tasks. And I created 3 different backlogs, one for each of the teams. And I explained them how to manage the backlog using an agile approach, doing the 2-week sprint planning sessions, and making sure everything kept updated in the backlog. So by then, I mean, that was the last thing I did, like give them the backlog and the process for continuous improvement. But what I want to say is that so this was a very small step towards long-term impact. So this was the first step of the organization, the engineering organization, to start looking at more bigger and complex changes in the organization. So this effort was focused on the emotional innovation of changing the organizational behaviors and meeting the needs and the desires of the engineering organization when they interacted with the proposal process. In some of the conversations during the workshop, with the organization talk about changing the process innovation, but to be able to do process innovation, they needed to involve the other directorates, and they were not ready to have that conversation yet. I mean, so they wanted to address first the emotional innovation and change the way people interface with the proposal process before reaching out to other organizations to make bigger changes to the proposal process. And they also have talks about using model-based systems engineering to help facilitate the knowledge sharing, the reuse of information between proposals, and collaboration between teams. So as a result of this effort, the main things that were implemented is that the organization found new methods and new tools to share knowledge across teams. And some of these things were very easy things to do, like having lessons learned sessions, brown bag sessions, creating a repository of knowledge so they could reuse information from different proposals. The management team found new ways to recognize the employees in a more timely manner instead of waiting until the end of the proposal process, which was like 2 years away from the beginning. So instead of waiting 24 months, they were recognizing people often during the proposal process for their hard work. And they found a new way to engage the proposal process earlier in the process so they could be more proactive in assigning resources and being ready to support the proposal process instead of being reactive. And this is just trying to show the results of the 1-year roadmap of the entire process. So when I started with the interviews, I identified hundreds of pains, 77 gains, and hundreds of potential opportunities for improvement. When I move into the design thinking workshops, then we have like 210 ideas, but the approach, the way it works is that you start broad. I mean, you start with a lot of challenge areas, a lot of ideas for improvement, but then you start narrowing down. And at the end of the engineering and management workshops, we came out with 6 concept posters, and then 6 how might we statements. And then when we moved to the large workshop with the entire organization, we started broad again. We had 213 ideas, but we started narrowing down until we focus on 6 high-value solutions, 6 storyboards, and 6 concept posters. So again, we start broad, where we start narrowing down, so we focus on the things that are important to the organization and important to the stakeholders. At the end, we selected, the organization selected top 3 recommendations that were created, were put in a backlog of tasks for implementation. So although the approach sounds like very straightforward, I wanted to highlight that it's not as easy as it looks, because I encountered resistance along the way during the year. First of all, the techniques, as I said before, the techniques were new in the organization. So I had to find a way to slowly introduce a technique so people feel comfortable with the design thinking process. And I would say that being a very technical organization, they like to have as much information as possible before the workshop. So what I did is that I gave them as much information as possible. I explained, I sent them reports showing the different techniques that we were using at the workshop that I was planning to use and what we were going to do. So they felt more comfortable walking into the workshop by knowing what was expected and what the end goal of the workshop was. The other thing is that with the design thinking process, especially during the stakeholder mapping activity and trying to identify the challenge areas, people need to talk about their emotions and their feelings. And some people they felt uncomfortable talking about the emotions and their feelings. So in that situation, I had to provide an alternate approach. For people who were not comfortable with the workshops, I gave them the option of doing an interview. And if they were not available for the interview, then I just send them the interview questions and they will send me their answers via email. But I still incorporated their feedback as part of the effort. So their voice was heard. And the other thing is that we try to make it as fun as possible. For example, the large workshop, we did not call it a workshop, we call it a retreat. And I think that changed the mindset of people walking into the workshop, because they did not see it as 8 hours of work. Instead, it was 8 hours of FaceTime with senior executive team, the management team. And we also invited people from other sites So that was an opportunity to see friends that they had not seen in a long time. So people were very excited to go to a retreat. And the other challenge area was the organizational culture. Coming from DoD, I didn't realize like until 4 months into the effort that the things that would have worked in my organization did not work in this other organization because they work in a different way. For example, the concept posters that were created during the engineering workshop, I mean, these are posters that are done like in an hour, very fast without overthinking. So the organization did not feel like the engineering team did not feel that this was the final product that they will put in front of the senior executive team. And they were uncomfortable briefing or showing that to the leadership team because it was not a final product. So I had to validate the needs of the different groups to make sure that they felt comfortable with the approach, but also for me to be able to get to where I wanted to be. So what I did is that instead of having them present the concept posters to the senior leadership team, I posted them on the walls. The day before the workshop, I had the conference room ready and available for people so they could just walk in and look at all the posters and the storyboards on the wall so they could come prepared for the workshop. And I also send them reports showing the results from the other workshops. So the key takeaways from this experience that I want to share with you is that when you are introducing change and the new techniques, do it in increments. So it's easier to introduce that change and people can embrace the new techniques. Tailor the approach to the needs of the organization. Validate the needs of each of the stakeholders, the different groups. Gather frequent feedback and adjust just your approach so you can meet the needs of the organization and bring value. And one thing is do not stop with recommendations. We usually think that we're done after we provide recommendations, but we need to give them a plan for action so they have a specific activities and a specific task for implementation and they know the way forward. And again, people like to learn new things. They get excited for change if you teach them something new. So the fact that the design thinking techniques were new in the organization created excitement for change because they wanted to learn more about the use of the techniques so they could use them in their specific projects. And these are some of the design thinking resources, some of the design thinking books, design thinking websites. The techniques that I presented tonight are from the Luma Institute of Design Thinking. These are some of the design thinking tools and apps. The Miro.com, they have some of the posters from the Luma Institute. And this is the experience report that I published about the case study with more details about the techniques and the experience. And thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for coming to my presentation, and feel free to contact me via LinkedIn or send me an email if you have any questions or if you have want more information about the techniques. Thank you.
Thank you, Lymari. So first off, what I would like to do is I would like to virtually present this letter of appreciation or this certificate of appreciation. We would normally do this in person, and but given our virtual environment, we do thank you very much. We will be sending this to you via email shortly afterwards. But thank you again for all of your yes, for everything. You did have several questions come up via chat. The first one I think was at minute 51. But I will leave it to you to either answer those questions in the order that you want to. If other people want to provide additional questions, I would like to keep this question session to 15 minutes. so that we can do the raffle. But I thank everyone for staying on for the additional time.
So there was a question here about if I had other facilitators to help me with the 50-person group, and the answer is yes. For the large workshop, we had 6 tables. So we broke the 50 people group in 6 tables, and we had 4 facilitators. But I will say that in addition to the 4 facilitators, since we invited people from the previous 2 workshops, they also became facilitators at their own tables. So that really helped with the design thinking workshop in the large setting, because the people who were already familiar with the techniques, they became facilitators at the table. So that really facilitated my job. In terms of if the process could be accelerated, I will say yes. I think that I spent too much time during the interview phase because I was trying to figure out the best way to move forward. So looking back now, I think I would not have spent too much time doing the value proposition canvas or the mission model canvas or even the interviews. I think that I could have just jumped into the design thinking workshops and be able to gather the information that I needed. There's a question, if someone got appointed to come after me and carry this work forward. As far as I know, no. I think they were making the different team leads accountable for the implementation. So I don't think they had someone dedicated to work on this after I was gone. So there's a question here. Would you say that familiarity, experience, knowledge of these techniques is needed to be able to successfully deliver this sort of change program? I would say no. I'm not an expert in design thinking by all means. What I did is that I reached out to a mentor, someone who had experience in design thinking, and that person trained me and helped me implement those workshops. So at the beginning, he led the first workshop with the engineering team, and then we co-led the workshop with the management team. And then in the large workshop, I was the one leading the workshop, and he was the facilitator. So basically, I learned the techniques through mentoring on the job training. What will management measure to determine if the process met expectations? I think the measure of success will be being able to assign those resources to work the proposals as early as possible in the process instead of being reactive. The way they were measuring progress was by engaging the other directorates very early in the process. Did management show an interest in continual process improvement? Yes, they were talking about doing a similar workshop once a year with the entire organization as a way of reassessing where they were at that point and identify new ways of working. I was planning to help facilitate the next large workshop, but then we had COVID and we stopped with the workshops. Everybody went virtual, so we never got the opportunity to do another workshop. What criteria did management use to select the 3 recommendations? Their criteria was, I think it was focused on the things that they knew that they could implement really fast, really quickly, so they could make progress. So one of the criteria was they wanted to make people, the engineering team, feel value as part of the process. So that's the incentivize the workforce. So that's why they decided to implement new ways of recognize the workforce in a more timely manner. The other criteria was reuse of information between proposals and sharing of information between teams. So that was also like a very easy thing to implement by creating a repository of knowledge where they could reuse and store the knowledge between proposals. So how did it turn out 1 year later after implementation? So this was, they saw it as the first step to make bigger changes. They had been talking about digital engineering, doing a digital engineering activity for entire center using model-based systems engineering. So this was like the first step to create the foundation to make bigger changes, especially in the area of technical innovation.
All right.
Yep. And if someone wants a copy of the slides, you just send me an email and I will send you a copy of the slides.
Thank you very much. I see that Dr. Kaiser raised his hand, but I do want to offer an opportunity for anyone who did not post in chat a question. You can unmute and ask your questions at this point. Dr. Kaiser, do you have a question?
Actually, I have a comment, some comments here. I think this was a really good presentation on the early stages of systems engineering in the pre-requirements stage. And you didn't only use design thinking, you were doing workflow analysis. And then on slide 27, you showed you were doing slip writing and you were doing brainstorming and other sessions. And then when you talked about creating a vision, what you were doing is what systems engineers would call creating a model without using that terminology. And the recommendations at the end were what systems engineers might call draft requirements. So the output of your whole thing was a set of requirements.
Yes, yes. So I would say that there are a lot of what I would call like similarities. Yeah. Yeah, between systems engineering and the design thinking process. I mean, it's just a different, I would say like a different approach, a different name, but yeah, it's basically the same process of identifying the requirements.
It's actually part of the requirements identification process, and it's one of the tools. And in your list of books, you missed this one.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. It was really good.
With that being said, I think we've had a successful meeting. Thank you very much again, Lymari, for your talk.